Today is the second day of the June 1985 7-day retreat. Maybe we will get to a koan later, but there were some things that have been brought up by people in meetings, which maybe we all could look at together. One thing that was brought up was that it seems that everything we do for ourselves. In observing oneself, this person stated it seems that everything that we do for ourselves in one way or another. Another person asked, is it at all possible that there be an action without any motive? That one do something without a motive, meaning a selfish motive? And then it has also been brought up by several people, many times, different people. In observing something, a habit, or an action that is going on, in becoming aware of it, it still continues, it still goes on. You seem to have implied the person will say that if there is really attention, whatever is observed or seen will stop or change. But I have found that in attending and watching, the habit, the anger, let's take it, anger, still goes on, it doesn't change. Somehow or other there seems to be a possible connection between these three things, and we will see. Look at it. In observing oneself in one's daily life and here in retreat, where there is a lot of time and quietness to watch oneself, superficially and maybe also profoundly, what is revealed is that whatever goes through the mind, or whatever one does, serves the self. I'm doing it for myself in one way or another. To feel better, to get better, to enjoy or to escape. Maybe reflecting in memory on one's life. One finds nothing that one has done that was not selfishly motivated. Now, one can observe this, and observe it repeatedly and thoroughly, from retreat to retreat and during one's daily living, and come to the conclusion that this is all there is. That this is human nature, and that one has to live with this, accept this as being so. at which point any kind of further investigation or inquiry or questioning stops. One has concluded. On the basis of all the evidence that one has gathered in oneself and others, this is so, this seems to be so. But the mind is affected by a conclusion. The questioning is, it atrophies, it dies out, because now one knows. Do you see that? That as soon as one reaches a conclusion, something happens in the mind, the openness to wonder, to inquire, to look, stops, because one knows this is so, and it seems futile to do anything or to observe any further. It's very painful to observe self-centeredness, because we have so many ideas about that we should be selfless. It's amazing to watch the bringing up of children, how parents will demand selflessness of their children while displaying unabashed selfishness. And then probably at that time this double standard comes into the mind, that the big ones are allowed to do it. They can do it. The little ones have to toe the line. After all, one is small. Another approach, other than concluding all human beings are selfish, this is the way we are conditioned and programmed, probably has its points too, its advantages. If we weren't selfish, everybody would walk all over us. Another approach, different from concluding about it and therefore shutting down the inquiring mind, is to wonder whether it's possible to act without a selfish motive. And asking this question, is nothing in there of I should attain that goal. It's an open question. It's not easy for us to ask open questions. One must not kid oneself that one has asked oneself an open question. It takes very careful, astute observation whether the whip is not behind the open question. Whether it doesn't come out of this feeling of guilt over one's selfishness and the deeply ingrained habit of having to become better, different, unselfish. So, if one asks this question, as probably many people do, who have observed the motive that reveals itself beneath our daily habits and actions, Can one ask this question without knowing whether it's possible or not, and no pressure to achieve selflessness? Asking innocently, can there be an action without a motive? and watching that it isn't in the course of time changing into there should be an action without a motive. It's happened a lot in our relationship that when questions were asked here, people have understood implicit in the question the command or the demand, there should be action without motive. I'm taking this. That a question is interpreted or twisted into a demand, a command or a precept. Can one be careful in listening? Whether there's an innocent question being asked, which does not imply we should be this way or you should become that way, because that immediately distorts the subsequent perception. It can only be open, free, pure, clear perception if nothing is in the mind of what should be perceived and how it should be perceived. Or what should be the end result of watching. That the watching or the questioning of whether there can be an action without a motive only takes place in order to, in the end, achieve the action without motive. If that goal looms there or beckons, then the observation is under pressure, under ancient pressure, and therefore distorted, not clear, beset with fear that one may not reach it. Or it already has the seed of self-deception in it. One wants the goal and so one deceives oneself that there is selfless action. In all of this, we are talking already about what is the quality of attention. In watching, becoming aware of what one has thought a moment ago, because if there's a moment of awareness, at that moment there is no thought. And what thoughts were there are already a memory. And that memory comes into awareness of what the thoughts were all about. So at that moment, when for whatever reason, I don't know the reason why awareness happens, but it does happen. One becomes aware that there has been a host of thoughts, maybe an hour of thinking or 35 minutes of thinking, fantasizing. At that instant, what is the quality of attention? Maybe the pure attention is so brief, it's gone, because immediately sets in my God, I'm a hopeless case. I'm just constantly thinking. Sometimes the thought, coming to a retreat and sitting there, more thoughts. By coming here, I'm just increasing my reservoir of thinking, which may be an illusion, because one is only much more aware, much more frequently aware of what goes on in the mind. Whereas in daily life, where there's so many things going on, actions demanded, responses demanded, and reactions taking place, there's mostly so little or no awareness at all of what's actually going on. So in setting out to find out whether there can be an action without a motive, How will one observe this? Or as the attention has dawned at the moment of having thought about what one will do, what one will get for oneself, do for oneself, build for oneself, or at the instant of attention, what's the quality of attention then? One has discovered a selfish motive again in the thoughts. How will one see it? How does one see it? With the motive to change it, to control it, to clamp down on it? Or to justify it by saying, well, that is, I guess, human nature? Or can something different come into being, which is free of all of these habits of reacting to ourselves and to others? By shedding light on these habits without condemning them. It's being said so often that this may already fall onto a habitual reception center in the brain. One hears it and it's just the words that one perceives or receives. But does one actually witness condemning oneself or others rather than observing? With not a shadow of separation from what is being observed. No observer there. No one there to know how to judge it. Just being there as one is. With awareness that is transparent. There is nothing solid in there that knows or judges or wants to get rid of or wants to keep. If there isn't this transparent awareness, then it's just, again, thinking with motive that analyzes what has been going on, interprets it, evaluates it. So one must be very careful when one says, I'm aware of anger or fear, but it doesn't go away. Why does one want it to go away? That's not transparent, empty observation. It's solid with want, solid with judgment, or solid with fear that it may continue. Can that itself come into awareness? This solidity of judging, of wanting to change, to get rid of. Meaning one does not stay with the surface of what comes into awareness, but one goes deeper than the surface. Person mentioned that if what is observed superficially doesn't go away, maybe if one just remains with it, something much deeper will come to light, as it usually does, because our consciousness is in many layers. layers of consciousness. Some seem to be totally out of reach and yet operating under the surface, but not inaccessible to this awareness which does not scare anything away by being judgmental. Does the thought come up, how can I get this transparent awareness? If so, can this come into awareness that this thought has come up? I want that. Just seeing it, hearing it happen. As one listens to the birds. Does the thought come up, I can never get this, it's not for me, I'm too dense, or whatever? Can one listen to these running comments coming out of the brain? With an awareness that doesn't want to get hold of anything. Doesn't want to push anything out of the way, doesn't oppose anything. And not justify anything. Is one just listening right now to words or doing that? In doing something, maybe a job one has here at the retreat, this is closest at hand. And one discovers in this observation a motive, I want to do this extra good so other people can see what a good worker I am. This is usually there, it's all habit. Or am I doing it as fast as the person next to me? She seems to be so much better at it. In discovering selfish motive, I'm using these labels. In looking, one doesn't have to label it. One can see it at a glance. In seeing it, does it drop? Not it should drop. That's selfish observation. That is motivated observation. Or does one conclude, my selfishness takes me right into the kitchen too? It's everywhere. There seems to be no way out. Again, this conclusion about oneself. You know, a motive, when it is seen, can actually drop. And the action, the work, the sitting, whatever one is doing, can renew itself without that motive. It can go on without it. Just because a motive has been discovered doesn't mean that the same activity can't go on without it. Once the motive has been thoroughly seen, and seen for its extraness, its irrelevancy. is habitualness. Maybe we should talk a little bit about habit, because all of our responses to ourselves, to other people, to our work are habitual. Meaning, by habit meaning, they are the same over and over again, repetitive, mechanical, occurring today as they will occur tomorrow, as they occurred yesterday. That's habit. And the brain functions largely in habits, because it's the most efficient way of functioning, and it doesn't have to be scanning and vacillating. What should I do? A lot of loss of energy, maybe anxiety. If there's a habit established, it's so safe, it's so secure to follow that, and efficient. And we find this security in our habits. Safety, feeling of protectedness in the habit. Actually, just as one may watch from the point of view of selfish action, one can watch whether there is anything we do that is not habitual, meaning repetitive, mechanical, and providing thereby the sense of security, safety, comfort. One may not like the habit, but there's some comfort in it. One may feel dragged out or depressed, isolated, and the picking up of a cigarette or whatever one may inhale, or something to drink, a piece of candy, something to eat, or a magazine, which is habitual. It is, one has done it before. It has worked to a certain extent, to a certain limited extent, and thus one feels safe. One doesn't have to face the depression, feeling of dragged outness or failure, separation from other people. Can habit be observed? With this awareness that we've been talking about, which is not used as a means to getting rid of the habit, but to illumine it, irradiate it with light and understanding. If this attention is not solid with the judge, or the, what is the word for someone who wants to better himself? Well, no word is necessary. Wanting to better oneself. Become one without habit, independent. If that's not there, if the awareness is free from, it's free, it's open. At that moment it is a totally free and unmotivated action. Do you see that? Observing a habit, not in order to get rid of it, but because it's there, it's ruling one, and it hides deeper things which one is afraid of looking at, and looking at the whole thing, including what one is escaping from, the whole thing from top to bottom, without any expectation of what may come of it. Fluidly, transparently, freely, lightly. Is that unmotivated action? If one becomes aware and sees and says, now I've got it, now I have it, and there's the solidity again. And the free-flowingness is not there. To see that in this flow of life of which we're all part. If the habit doesn't change, can one, without any pressure, but out of wanting to find out, out of curiosity, ask, why doesn't it stop? Why does it persist? No whip in that. An open, passionate question. And that will bring awareness and observation in its wake. It can't help bring it in its wake. One wants to find out something, one has to watch. Not assume I've watched it yesterday or during the last retreat and it didn't go away, so what's the use of watching it? Or I've watched it and watched it and it never has changed. So not to conclude, not to come to an end with one's reasoning. To a conclusion, let me say. Sometimes the reasoning does come to an end and one has to start looking. Maybe there's still time for this koan. Maybe we could call it a story. A few people have asked me, why are you still doing koans? I don't know what exactly was in the question. Some of these stories are a good starting point for inquiring, looking into ourselves, because it's something that we can all share, are presented, and we can enter into the scene that is being presented. This one is about a traveling monk who visits other monks, teachers, hermits. I take it that in ancient China the way of learning and watching and attending and responding happened often in very brief encounters. And this story is about two such brief encounters. The traveling monk raps on the door of a hermit who's been sitting in solitude and is sitting at the moment of the knock. And the traveling monk opens the door and he says, "Are you in? Are you in?" And the hermit just raises his fist. And the traveling monk says, "The water is too shallow here for a deep ship to anchor. and he leaves. He visits another hermit, knocks on the door. Are you in? Are you in? And this hermit also raises his fist. And the traveling monk says, freely you give, freely you take, freely you bestow life, freely you kill. And made a profound bow and left. The particular modes of expression are Chinese Zen conditioned. I don't think anybody here sitting by themselves, unless they had read these stories and heard them many times in a talk, if somebody knocked on the door and said, "Are you in?" would raise a fist. Maybe. I know how one feels if one has sat for a long time by oneself and somebody knocks and says, "Are you in?" Maybe one raises one's fist. I don't know. But not to get stuck on those particular expressions or think that this is, well, I don't think we're into this anymore. Becoming Zen-y. Also the expression, freely you give, freely you take away. Freely you bestow life, freely you take life away. Does one get the feeling for what this expresses? To be free to give life, or to live, let's say to live, and free to die. I don't mean when the time of physical death comes, but free to die to yesterday, or the last moment, no matter how pleasurable or unpleasant it was, how annoying or gratifying, to die to it and to freely live this new moment. And this is what the monk tells this hermit. Freely, you do that very freely. And the first one, what does he say? He says, the water is too shallow here for a big ship to anchor, and he leaves. If one looks at this story, first impression, let's say, with one's habitual responses, habitual ways of understanding, one may interpret it to mean how does one interpret it to mean? What does one interpret it to mean? There's a question and there's a response, and there is the response to the response. In one case, highly unfavorable. One could maybe say insulting. Depending on the recipient of this comment. In the other case, praising. Maybe even if one listens again, flattering. There's some flattery in that and some insultingness in the first. Praise and blame, blame and praise. Approaching it with one's conditioned mind. The conclusion could be the first guy, the first hermit raised his fist in the right way, and the other one raised it in the wrong way. Maybe not enough energy. Maybe a vacillation. Or maybe it was clear that there was imitation. Doing what he had seen somebody else do, whereas the first one did it so authentically. Who is judging in this case? This traveling monk who came by happened to be a well-known teacher, well-known Zen monk teacher. I don't know whether he was known to these two hermits, the case doesn't say that. But when we read it, his name was Joshu, and one reads the name Joshu, there's already imagery there of a famous, deeply enlightened, fully enlightened Zen teacher. This is what one has heard and read in many books. So, if a deeply enlightened Zen teacher comes to one's door and one is a Zen monk, one is asked and one responds, and then comes either a praise or a blame. How does one respond? One has just raised a fist and one is told the water's too shallow here for a big ship to anchor. Does one take into account who says it? There's an image of the person, famous teacher. He must know something about me. If he says that, he must see something about me that I don't see. Or is one hurt? Very likely. Hurt in one's pride, hurt in one's image. Because when one is insulted or hurt, one watches minutely, carefully with this transparent awareness that is unprejudiced. One may find that it is an image that is hurt most of the time. It's the idea one has of oneself that is hurt, that smarts. And likewise, when a famous teacher praises one, how does one respond? How does one react? One can't just brush this off, one has to look at it. A famous person, that doesn't matter whether it's a Zen teacher or whoever, praises one lavishly for what one has just done or produced. Not only how does one respond, but what is it that responds to that? One hears the words, and then what? Is there immediately the image of oneself, which is getting a tremendous boost? One can just see it flourishing in front of one's eyes, inner eyes. If there is no attention, that happens. We're so conditioned, all of us. It happens automatically, mechanically. Because we do have images of ourselves which are always precariously feeble, unstable. That's the very nature of an image, to be unstable. Constantly needing reinforcement, nourishment, boost, and constantly dreading the opposite, deflation, insult, hurt, unfavorable comparison. Can one look at this in depth, because so much pain, maybe most of our pain and aggravation and all of our revenge systems that are built into us to then hurt the other. Tell him you too. All of it is based on this. Praise and reward. Reward and punishment, praise and blame. We were nurtured with it from little on. You can see it with little children. The power of the punishment and the power of the praise and the reward. The power to distort the child for the sake of getting praise and avoiding blame. Coming back to the story itself, if one is not too quick with concluding that these things were said because one did it right and the other one did it wrong, but to observe how quick one does conclude, not just with a story, but in our relationship with each other. This implicit trust in people who are famous, that they must know something, that they must see something that I don't, or he doesn't. Rather than looking for oneself, regardless of what the famous person says or doesn't say. Albeit sensitive to what is the conditioned response to it. That's there, that's programmed in. But awareness is unaffected by program. It illuminates it. But it goes beyond that. Maybe this Joshua didn't say these things at all to praise and to blame, but just to throw a little challenge into these hermits' huts. So if one sits in solitude, one may feel, may or may not, I've never done it, a certain sense of equilibrium and peace setting in. One may feel one is beyond some of these conditioned responses. And here, this was his way of traveling around and throwing things into huts. And let them do what they want to with it. That's neat. You're gone. You never hear the end of it. It's really saying it's for you to find out how you respond and what you did and what came up. It's for us to find out. Not to say, well, maybe because he said this, therefore I must be like that. It's how we go about evaluating ourselves. Or not just or, but also looking. Person says something that's blaming, derogatory, or criticizing, to look. Is one free to look? Or is all systems so tense and so defensive? And the excuses or rationalizations, the explanations are already coming out, then one can't look. Maybe the person had something. Maybe there was something. If one is not so identified with oneself, what one has done, what one has produced or said, one is not so totally identified. This is me and I have to protect it, come what may, or whatever it was, I have to protect it. If that is seen and eased, then, yeah, maybe there's something. was done wrong, was said wrong, or could have done better. Or else one realizes it was a pure challenge. In this case, they worked this way with each other, challenging each other, and then seeing whether the response that came to the challenge was free of this solid center of me. Because then it's really free when this solid me isn't there, that defends and attacks and rationalizes. When that's not there, then a free response can flow out. It's not separate from the challenge. They come from the same place, namely from nowhere. And just as with the hurt and insult and injury, so with the praise and flattery, maybe even harder to deal with, because one is always so starved for appreciation. But what is it that is starved? Watch it minutely, clearly. It's a picture which feasts on the flattery only to be empty again tomorrow, in need of more, and always afraid it may not get it. That's when we live in images. Such a precarious, shadow-like life, which is not even living. Do you see that? And how does one see it? We will end here for today.